thank you for joining us on the Serpents and Doves podcast. This is a Reformed confessional podcast of two Baptists that want to help God's people who have been sent out into this world to fulfill Jesus' command to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. We discuss the questions of our culture to help Christians give an answer. Welcome back to the Serpents and Doves podcast. It is great to be with you today. I'm Josh Wallnofer, and I'm joined by my co-host and friend Frank Butler. Today we are talking about manhood and about the recent school shootings. Frank, you sent me a text message earlier last week, and it was a pretty powerful few paragraphs, and I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for where we're going today.
Yeah, I took the time last week to sit down and write out some of the thoughts I was having concerning the school shooting and the things that occurred. So we'll talk about this a little bit, and we're going to use this as a springboard in some other situations that occur around that and what's causing that and what's surrounding it. God created men, boys, young men, grown men, men of all sizes, men of all ages, males. God created them with a natural instinct to defend, protect, be courageous, and to fight. All these things are part of natural manhood. All these things are what God has instinctively given men. All these things are a part of natural manhood. All these things are instilled in mankind as instincts. This is what men do. This is what God created us for. This is how we're to take dominion throughout the earth, as God commanded Adam to do. Since this is true, we should be teaching our young men to defend and protect the weaker of society, the women, the children, the elderly, things such as that. So because God has created young men to be this way, God has created these natural instincts in men, when situations occur, men should respond. They should respond the way God has created them to respond to it. So in a situation like a school shooting that happened a few weeks ago, or any of the shootings that happened over the past several years, we look at what's happening and we see one person that's attacking everyone else, and we see the men running for their lives next to the women, next to the children. Everyone's fleeing for safety. Biblically speaking, men were made to protect these people, so it shouldn't be that the man is running next to the female. It should be the man is grabbing the female, covering her with his body to get away, or the men that are closer to this shooter are turning and saying, we're going to stop this. We're not going to let this continue.
No, this is a really important point. Why is there such a disconnect? Why do you have a school officer running away from the gunshots, not to the gunshots,
and hiding in the stairwell?
Why do you have police that could go into the building being told not to enter?
And that's what springboarded the whole thing I wrote. What has caused us to purge these natural instincts that God has given us? What has happened where men, their first thought isn't to protect, their first thought isn't to defend, their first thought isn't to fight? What has happened to us?
Yeah, our society definitely has an issue, and even the young men in the schools, like you're saying, I know this would be very controversial to some people, and we're not trying to make light of the sober realization that someone came in with a gun and was attacking people. But the reality is that if you have all of these young men, hundreds of young men, why don't you see the kind of bravery that we might expect of an 18-year-old who's in the Army or in the Marines or in the Navy or the Coast Guard? We send these young men to war, and definitely, yes, they have training, but definitely many of them are brave and courageous, and they're willing to do things that many others would not do.
God made men with one of the things I listed was the instinct to fight, to protect. The opposite of manhood is not cowardice. The opposite of manhood is not what we're seeing. No, the opposite of manhood is untamed manhood. So a young man knows how to fight, and he wants to defend something. He wants to fight against something. Our job is to teach him how to use that rightly so that he fights when it's necessary, when he should be doing it. So if that's the logic, then in a situation where we have thousands of 17, 18-year-old young men, that should be the most dangerous place to cause a problem, because it's not that you're going to get people that run away. It's that you're going to get young men who are itching for a fight, because that's the manhood that they have been matured to so far.
This is part of the first sin, right? Mm-hmm. God told Adam to have dominion, and he was to do what? To protect his wife. He was to lead her to the tree of life. He was to be fruitful and multiply, and God gave him stewardship over his wife as a spiritual leader and as a protector. And when the serpent came to tempt Eve, Adam should have crushed the head of the serpent, like the second Adam, Jesus Christ, at the cross. And Romans 16 says that the God of all peace will soon crush the serpent, Satan, under our feet shortly. But instead, what did Adam do? He entertained what his wife said. And instead of protecting her, he ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, bringing damnation not just to her, but to the whole human race.
The second Adam did the epitome of manhood. is self-sacrificing. That's what it is. Jesus Christ sacrificed himself for his church, for his bride, to sanctify her, to make her holy, and to protect her from the serpent. In the same way, men today, we need to be training our young boys, our young men, and men today to be self-sacrificing. So in a situation where something horrific is happening anywhere in public, rather than seeing the men fleeing and hiding with the women and children, we need to see the young men and the grown men say, no, I will sacrifice myself to protect them.
Now, I know there's some women that are really angry. You guys are our listeners, and you're upset. And you're saying, how can you talk about women that way? Women have power, and women have grace, and women are women of strength. And we agree with all this. We're not saying that's not true. But what we are saying is that God has given the responsibility to men. Now, ladies, some of you guys are better shots than us men are. Some of you will gladly defend your family like a mother hen would gather her chicks under her wings. That's what Jesus said. And we're not making light of that self-defense mechanism and the boldness and braveness and the heroic nature that you ladies will manifest in a time of need. But the point is, if men are there, it's our responsibility to lay down our lives first. We're not making light of what you could do, and there's no doubt there's been many times that women have defended their homes, and women have been used of God in this way. Women like Deborah, when the men would not stand up, it was a woman that God used. But that should not be the norm. You should be valued and prized so much by the men in your life that you should not have to lay down your life first, that they should be doing it for you. Now, we're going to come back. We're going to take a break right now, and we're going to come back on Serpents and Doves and continue this discussion about why our men are acting this way and what can we do to change it.
Welcome back to segment 2 of the Serpents and Doves podcast. We mentioned in the first segment that the question, what has happened? What have we done to our young men to remove this urgency, to remove this sense of manhood from them, to remove biblical masculinity from their instinct? What have we done? And I want to pose that question directly to you. In our culture, in our churches, in our society as a whole, in our families, what have we done to sort of alleviate young men from the responsibilities of masculinity?
Doug Wilson wrote a great book called Future Men, about how we are to raise boys to become men, to fight giants. And he tells a really good illustration in the beginning of the book about President Theodore Roosevelt and how when he was teaching Sunday school, a boy showed up and he had a black eye and he had been in a fight, and he admitted to TR that another boy had been kind of picking on his sister. And so he fought him. The future president felt that the boy had done the right thing and had given him $1 kind of as a congratulations for defending your sister. And unfortunately, the church clergy thought this was too much, and they dismissed the future president from being a Sunday school teacher anymore because he congratulated this boy on manhood and on defending his weaker sister. And so I think that is a great illustration of the problem in the church today. We have taught our boys it's okay to fight, but we've taught them to fight for the wrong things and not the right things. So Psalm 144, David says, "Blessed be the Lord, my God, my strength, because he teaches my hands to war and my fingers to battle." And today we fight, but we fight all the wrong things. We fight video games, right? Our kids get their aggression out in Pokemon battles with cards. We fight by watching sports on television, and we are spectators. But we don't actually fight in the things that really matter. And I'm not saying that you can't watch sports or that you can't play card games or whatever. What I'm saying is, though, that's not the fight that God has called us to. And so one of the things I think is that fathers have given up their role as being the model of manhood for their sons. I think that we've given that role to teachers, to professional athletes,
The state,
to the government, to government school teachers, to people like the president.
the church.
We've abdicated our responsibility to youth pastors and Sunday school teachers when God has given that role to fathers first.
Why don't you tell us how you really feel there, Pastor? I mean, good night. I'll add to that. You're absolutely spot on. And if you haven't read Future Men, if you're a father that hasn't, and you have boys, go read Doug Wilson's Future Men. But something I want to add to that, what you said, though, we've taught them how to fight the wrong things, or what a lot of parents have done through the years is any kind of fighting is an excuse, similar to what happened in your story. One of the things that we also do that I'll add to that is, if we can't get the child to use that aggression through video games and through sports and through fighting all the wrong things, we try to medicate it out of them. So when we have a young boy who he just won't sit still, he's restless, he always wants to be doing something, if we can't do anything about it, we take him to a doctor, and I'm getting controversial, we take him to a doctor and we give him a pill to make him stop doing that. Part of the reason he's doing that is because God has made him to want to do something, to want to defend something, to represent something, to be a part of something larger than himself. And when we begin medicating them to remove that, we're warring against what the natural instincts God has given them. I'm not saying some children don't have things like this we need to deal with, certain struggles that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, ADHD is a real thing, but the issue is, does every situation need to be diagnosed with ADHD and immediately given medication?
I will say that I think there are pathological and biological issues in children that need to be dealt with through medication. However, we've drawn that line way too soon, when 9 times out of 10 the reality is, no, you have a boy and you need to teach him how to tell him that to be a man.
Yeah, he needs the rod of correction.
You don't need, yes, you don't need
because
to
we love
alleviate
him.
it from
we
him.
love him, and we don't want to always provide an easy way out.
My son, he just acts so crazy. Well, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of reproof will drive it far from him.
Yes. He needs the rod of correction. He needs his father to attach that child to the father's side. So your son should be like arrows in the quiver, right? Your children are supposed to be that way, and they should be a sword on your side. So like literally your son learns to love the things you love, Dad. And these young men, they don't have role models, or their role models are people out there in the culture, and they love the wrong things. They value the wrong things. They don't see their fathers fighting for their marriages, and their fathers getting their hands dirty and fighting for their jobs and fighting for the gospel.
That last one in particular, they don't see their fathers fighting for truth. We look at people who will fight for truth. Fighting is a masculine trait that God's given mankind, okay? We see people that are fighting, whether it be physically or verbally, and it doesn't matter what they're fighting for, unless they're fighting for our military. It doesn't matter what they're fighting for. They're contentious, they're divisive, and they need to cut that out immediately.
Yeah.
Well, Paul had some fights. Jesus had some fights.
Yes.
Peter had some fights. And that's a masculine trait to have.
What did Paul say to the Corinthian church, 1 Corinthians 15? Be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. What's his last message to Timothy before Paul goes to become a martyr in 2 Timothy 4? Preach the word in season and out of season, which means preaching the truth is always in season. As one old fundamental Baptist preacher said years ago, if preaching gets out of season, keep shooting. And the truth is never out of season. And he said, reprove and rebuke and exhort. So be steadfast. Don't flinch. Don't back down.
So what we've essentially said so far in this is the number one problem. It's summed up in a lot of different ways, but the number one problem with why our young men do not have the instinct to be courageous and to bear true masculinity is because their fathers have found all these ways we've mentioned to abdicate that responsibility themselves. And they haven't set the example before them, and they haven't trained them to do the same thing. They haven't trained them to bear biblical masculinity themselves. Second to that, though, is our culture's love affair with feminism. We want to put women on such a high pedestal that it's not just that we value women so much, that men need to be more like them as well.
So you need to flesh that out a little bit, because the Bible does say that women should be our queens. I mean, they should be on a high pedestal, but you're not talking about that kind of a pedestal.
No, I'm talking about a cultural pedestal. If I could be controversial for a second, or my whole life.
You have permission.
Yeah, for a second or my whole life. Our culture wants to see women as warriors. They want to see women on the battlefield. They want to see women as generals. They want to see women as presidents. They want to see women leading the culture and defining the culture and running the family. They want to see women as the head of the household. And biblically speaking, women are to be elevated, not to that role. We want men to take on the feminine qualities of women in these things.
Let's be really clear here, that God made Adam. He said it was not good that Adam should be alone. There was a deficiency in Adam. It wasn't enough for him to be there by himself. Adam needs Eve, and Eve makes Adam complete. Yet, at the same time, Eve is gifted by God with certain things, and Adam's gifted by God with certain things. And Adam should not try to be like Eve, and Eve should not try to be like Adam. They have some overlap. They have the same brains, but they have differences. And what we're saying here is that we have led a culture to treat our young men in a very feminine way. Many of us parents, because we like things perfect, we don't let our kids get dirty anymore. We don't want our boys to go outside and shoot slingshots and shoot BB guns. And
guns?
Yeah, not guns. We say these things are unhealthy, yet every little boy has a drive in him. I don't care whether he likes sports or not. He has a drive in him to blow things up, to fight toys, to sit on the ground and let them bang into each other, to shoot a slingshot. I mean, this is something that God has put inside of a young boy. And yet we have tried to say, no, we can't let our boys get dirty. No, they shouldn't play with guns. Now, we're not saying to be irresponsible. We're not saying that we should be dangerous or anything like that. We're saying there is a moderate and healthy way to do these things, not to glorify violence, but because we do want our sons to be warriors. We want them to slay dragons, and we want them to slay giants.
We want them to be biblically violent.
So you better unpack that.
Biblically violent. I'm a father and a husband. If someone comes into my home in the middle of the night with the intention to do harm to my wife and children, I'm going to be extremely violent. And I'm going to be doing what God has said.
You're not going to stop right there and get on your hands and knees and pray for the Lord's blessing on them and that they would have revival at that very moment.
No, I'm going to be a good Calvinist, and I'm going to send them where He has predestined them to go.
I think after you shoot them, you have a great chance to witness to them. There'll be a captive audience at that point.
You got a couple. No, I'm a good shot. They won't be a few seconds. But if someone tries to come in my home and do harm to my family, I'm going to be violent in defending them. There is a biblical place for violence, but it is not it's not the way our culture has defined it, and it's not the way that most of us understand it. But there is when David was called upon to be the king of Israel and to defend the nation of Israel, he was praised for the amount of lives he took. He was doing the Lord's work in defending his nation. He was doing the Lord's work in protecting God's people. He was doing the work in being a shepherd. In the same way, a father and a husband has a time when he may be required to be biblically violent. If we've taken an attitude of, you should never be aggressive, that chauvinistic garbage needs to be thrown away, you should never think this way, well, we're turning our masculine young men into effeminate young ladies by doing such.
Yeah. We're rejecting the God-given authority that Adam has at the creation and that every man is called to be a protector and a defender. And this is bearing the image of God, right? Just like a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings and she would protect them. So, Father God, right, our Lord is the one who says He never slumbers nor sleeps, and He will keep your going out, and He will keep your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And that we can look up on high and see the Lord coming to be our helper. That's what men are called to be. We're supposed to image God. We're supposed to represent God in this way. If there's a need, men are supposed to step in. They're called to this, to be watchmen on the city, to stop something before it happens. And so, we're not trying to be harsh on these young men that were in that school. Look, if I'm a young man and someone comes into the school shooting and I'm there in that situation, how will I act? I don't know. I would hope I would be brave. And I would hope if I had any opportunity to stop the evil, like the 9/11 hijackers in the one plane, how they fought back, right? No one condemns them for that. They were considered brave. And these are the kind of stories that we should be saying are bravery.
When all this happened, I was talking to my wife about this, and I said to her, I want to raise our son in such a way that if he is ever sitting in a classroom and he hears gunshots outside that door, his first instinct is to tell the women of his class, you hide in this room right here, I'm barricading this door, other guys grab items, whatever you can, we're going to protect.
Yes.
If they breach this door, then as men, we will die to protect
Jesus, John 15, right? That's where you started here. Greater love has no one than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. And Jesus laid down His life. This is sacrifice. We might be called to that. We might not all be called to that, but we are called to it spiritually, to take up the cross, to die to self. And sometimes we have to lay down our lives as men for the good of others.
I said feminism is the secondary cause. I mean, fatherhood's the number one reason why men aren't acting like men. And feminism, our love affair with it and wanting even men to be like women, has been the second part of it. Well, that second problem, feminism, is also a result of the first problem. Lack of fatherhood, lack of masculinity, lack of a godly masculinity.
So one of our good friends here at Serpents and Doves, Pastor Lonnie Wesley, who pastors here in Pensacola, he made this statement this week that we want to have him on the show So, Pastor Wesley, if you hear this, we're going to be calling you. He said, children cannot be what children cannot see. And don't you think that that is exactly what we have here? Children cannot be what they cannot see.
That's exactly what we have here. We're saying today on the Serpents and Doves podcast, we are saying explicitly that we have several generations of young men who refuse to embrace godly masculinity because we have generations that came before them that refuse to embrace godly masculinity and fatherhood.
Fathers, what are we supposed to do? Deuteronomy 6. Raise up young men. Teach them. Pray with them. Teach them in your house and at the gates of the city. Teach them wherever you go, in the morning and at night. Mentor them. Disciple them. Invest in them. Keep them at your side like a sword, or like arrows in the quiver. May they always be with you, and may you lead them to love the things you love, and love the things God loves, and to hate the things God hates. Old like the Lion of Judah, but also harmless as doves. May we follow Christ's example in these things.
Thank you for listening to the Serpents and Doves podcast. We hope that you tune in next week. Grace and peace. Thank you for listening today on the Serpents and Doves podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please hit like and share with your friends. We can also be found on iTunes, Google Play, and Podbean. If you like what you heard, give us a 5-star rating. If you did not, head over to the Facebook page and tell us why. Until next time, grace and peace.